She stood at the edge of the ballroom, utterly alone, while her husband smiled at everyone but her. The great chandeliers of Ashford Hall blazed with candlelight, their golden glow spilling over silk gowns and polished evening coats. Music drifted through the air like a promise of gaiety, and laughter rose in waves as the Duke of Ashford moved through his guests with the easy grace of a man who commanded every room he entered. He paused to speak with Lord and Lady Pemberton, inclined his head to Sir William Drake, even offered a rare, fleeting smile to Miss Clara Haddington, who blushed prettily and lowered her fan. But his eyes never once found his wife. Lady Evelyn Ashford stood beside a marble pillar, her gloved fingers resting lightly against the cool stone. She had dressed with care for this evening, a gown of soft lavender silk that brought out the warmth in her chestnut hair, pearls at her throat that had belonged to his mother, a quiet hope tucked beneath her ribs that tonight perhaps he might look at her, really look at her. But the hope felt foolish now, a small, bruised thing that shrank with every passing moment. She was the Duchess of Ashford, and no one spoke to her. Not because they were cruel. The guests were polite enough, a nod here, a murmured "Your Grace" there, but they sensed what she already knew. The Duke did not value his wife, and in their world a wife without her husband's regard was invisible. A whisper reached her, not meant for her ears but careless enough to drift. "Poor thing, married a year and he still looks through her as if she were a window. Mother says he only wed her to settle her father's debts, a transaction, nothing more. No wonder he never stays in the same room." Evelyn's throat tightened, but she did not flinch. She had learned to wear stillness like armor. She let the voices wash over her and reminded herself to breathe. In, out, the music played on. The candles flickered. The Duke moved to the far side of the ballroom, his dark head bent toward Lady Margaret Westcott, and something inside Evelyn cracked very softly, like ice too thin to hold. She remained at the pillar until the last guests departed, until the servants began to extinguish the chandeliers, until the great hall fell silent and the only sound was the distant click of a door closing. Her husband had not said a single word to her all night. She climbed the stairs alone, her lavender skirts trailing like a forgotten dream, and when she reached her chamber, she sat before the mirror and unpinned her hair with steady hands. She did not cry. She had cried enough in the first months of this marriage to fill every vase in Ashford Hall. Now there was only a hollow ache and a question that circled endlessly in her mind. How long could a heart continue to hope before it simply gave up? The answer, she would later realize, was already taking shape inside her, quiet, certain, irreversible. The morning after the ball brought no comfort. Evelyn took breakfast in the small sunlit parlor that had become her sanctuary, a tray of tea and toast before her, a book open but unread. The windows overlooked the east garden, where the first roses of early summer were beginning to bloom, but she found no pleasure in the sight. She was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could mend, but a deeper weariness that settled into her bones and made every movement feel weighted. When the door opened without a knock, she knew before looking up that it was him. Alexander Ashford, Duke of Ashford, strode in with the same cool authority he carried everywhere. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his features carved with a severe handsomeness that had stolen her breath the first time she saw him, on their wedding day when he had lifted her veil and looked at her as if she were a contract he was obligated to sign. His dark hair was brushed back, his jaw clean-shaven, his coat perfectly tailored. He was impeccable, distant, a stranger wearing her husband's name. "Evelyn," he spoke her name as a statement, not a greeting. She rose as custom demanded and dipped a small curtsy. "Your Grace." A flicker of something, irritation perhaps, crossed his face. "You need not be so formal. We are alone." "Are we?" she thought. "We have been alone together since the day we wed, and you have never once allowed me to feel it." She said nothing, merely waited, her hands folded before her. He glanced at her breakfast tray, then at the book, then back at her face. "I am leaving for London this afternoon. I will be gone a fortnight, perhaps longer. Matters of business require my attention. A fortnight, perhaps longer. He delivered the news the way he might inform a steward of a change in the household accounts. No warmth, no regret, no indication that her presence or absence mattered in the slightest. "I understand," Evelyn said. "I shall manage the estate in your absence as before." "See that you do." He hesitated, as if on the verge of adding something more, but the moment passed. He gave a curt nod and turned toward the door. Something desperate and foolish rose in her throat. "Alexander." He stopped, did not turn. "Is there," she swallowed, "is there anything you require before you depart, anything I might do?" The silence stretched. She saw his shoulders tense, the fine wool of his coat pulling taut. Then very quietly he said, "No, there is nothing." And he left her standing there, with the morning sunlight slanting across the floor and the scent of roses drifting through the open window. That was the moment, she would later think, when the last ember of hope began to cool. Not with a dramatic confrontation, not with tears or angry words, but with a simple, quiet dismissal that told her everything she had refused to believe. She was not his wife in any way that mattered. She was an obligation, a duty, a name on a marriage contract. She sat back down and stared at the untouched toast. Her hand drifted almost unconsciously to rest against her stomach, where a faint, unfamiliar flutter had begun to stir in recent days. She had told no one. She was not yet certain, but a suspicion had taken root, fragile and terrifying, and she did not know whether it was a blessing or another weight to carry alone. If she carried his child, what would change? Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. She closed her eyes and let the uncertainty wash over her, and when she opened them again, something had shifted behind her gaze. A quiet resolve, a decision she had not yet put into words. If he did not need her, she would find something that did. The village of Ashford lay less than a mile from the great house, a cluster of stone cottages and winding lanes that had seen little improvement in a generation. The tenants were loyal but weary, their children often barefoot, their school a cramped room above the blacksmith's forge where an elderly vicar did his best with a handful of tattered books. Evelyn discovered it 3 days after the Duke departed for London. She had gone walking to escape the oppressive silence of the hall, her maid trailing behind, and the sound of children's voices drew her toward the forge. Through a grimy window she saw them, a dozen small faces bent over slates, their expressions hungry for something more than bread. The vicar, a gentle man named Mr. Hollis, was attempting to teach arithmetic with a cracked slate and a piece of chalk worn to a nub. She stood in the lane for a long time, watching. Then she pushed open the door. "Your Grace," Mr. Hollis nearly dropped his chalk. The children scrambled to their feet, eyes wide, unsure whether to bow or flee. Evelyn smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she had felt in months. "Please, do not stop on my account. I merely wish to see the school." What she saw broke her heart and mended it in the same instant. The children were ragged, but their eagerness was a living flame. They answered her questions shyly at first, then with growing enthusiasm, showing her their slates, reciting their letters. A little girl with tangled red curls named Lily took her hand and asked if she was a real Duchess, and Evelyn laughed and said she supposed she was, though she did not feel very grand. By the time she left, a plan had begun to form. She would build them a proper school, a real building with windows that let in light and a fireplace to keep them warm in winter. She would hire a qualified teacher. She would fill the shelves with books. If her husband did not need her, these children did. If her heart had no place in the great house, it would find a home here. She wrote to Alexander that night, a brief, polite letter informing him of her intentions and requesting the necessary funds. His reply arrived a week later, terse and unobjectionable. "Do as you see fit. The steward will release the sum you require." No warmth, no praise, no curiosity, but also no refusal. It was enough. The schoolhouse rose over the course of that summer, stone by stone, hope by hope. Eveline threw herself into the work with a fervor that surprised even herself. She visited the site daily, her gloves soon worn at the fingers, her hems dusted with mortar. She consulted with the builder, chose the window glass, ordered slates and primers from London. The villagers, at first bewildered by the sight of their Duchess standing in a muddy field discussing drainage, gradually warmed to her. They began to greet her by name. They brought her cups of cool water. They told her stories of their children. And the children, oh, the children, they adored her. They called her Lady Evie when they thought no one was listening, and she did not correct them. She taught them songs and read to them from the few storybooks she had brought from Ashford Hall, and when little Lily presented her with a wilted daisy picked from the roadside, Eveline pressed it into her pocket and kept it there until the petals crumbled to dust. She had never been happier. It was a strange, aching sort of happiness, threaded through with loneliness, but it was real. She had found a purpose, a reason to rise each morning, and she no longer waited by the window for a husband who did not come. When Alexander returned from London in early autumn, she greeted him politely, informed him of the school's progress, and then excused herself to attend a meeting with the vicar. She did not notice the flicker of surprise in his eyes as she walked away. She did not see him stand at the window and watch her carriage disappear down the drive. But someone else did. Lord William Harrington arrived at Ashford Hall on a rain-soaked afternoon in late September. He was a distant cousin of the Duke, a scholar of modest fortune who had spent the past 3 years traveling the continent and collecting ancient manuscripts. He was also, as the household soon discovered, possessed of an easy charm and a smile that could coax conversation from the most reluctant soul. Eveline met him at dinner on the evening of his arrival. She had returned from the schoolhouse late, her hair slightly wind-blown, her cheeks flushed from the brisk ride. She had not had time to change into formal attire, and she entered the dining room in a simple woolen gown that bore a small smudge of ink on the sleeve. "Forgive my appearance," she said, taking her seat. "I lost track of time." Alexander, seated at the head of the table, regarded her with his usual inscrutable expression. "Lord Harrington, may I present my wife, the Duchess of Ashford?" Lord William rose and bowed, his hazel eyes bright with curiosity. "Your Grace, I have heard a great deal about your school. The village is quite abuzz with praise." Eveline felt a small flush of pleasure. "You are kind to say so. It has become a labor of love." "I should like to see it if you would permit. Education is a subject dear to my heart." "Of course, I would welcome your thoughts." The conversation flowed easily after that. Lord William spoke of his travels, of libraries in Florence and universities in Heidelberg, and Eveline found herself leaning forward, asking questions, laughing at his dry humor. He treated her not as a duchess, but as a person of intelligence and opinion, and it was intoxicating in a way she had not anticipated. Across the table, Alexander ate in silence. His knife moved across his plate with precise, deliberate strokes. He did not join the conversation. He did not smile, but his eyes, dark and unreadable, followed the exchange between his wife and his cousin with an intensity that grew sharper by the minute. When Eveline laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh, at one of Lord William's anecdotes, the Duke's hand tightened around the stem of his wine glass until his knuckles paled. No one noticed. Autumn deepened, and Lord William's visit stretched from a week into a fortnight. He proved to be an invaluable asset to the school, donating a collection of children's primers and spending several afternoons helping the older students with their Latin. The children adored him. The vicar praised him, and Eveline, starved for intelligent companionship, found herself spending more and more time in his company. They walked together through the village, discussing philosophy and poetry. They sat in the schoolhouse after lessons, planning future improvements. He never overstepped, never said anything improper, but his admiration was unmistakable. He looked at Eveline the way a man looks at a rare and precious thing, not with greed but with wonder. The villagers noticed, the servants noticed, and Alexander, watching from the windows of Ashford Hall, noticed most of all. One evening, as Evelyn returned from the village, she found her husband waiting in the entrance hall. He stood rigid by the fireplace, his jaw set, his eyes shadowed. "You were with Harrington," he said. "It was not a question." "Yes, we were reviewing the accounts for the school's winter supplies." "You spend a great deal of time with him." She paused in the act of removing her gloves. "He has been helpful. I did not think you would object to a member of your own family assisting your wife." "He is a distant cousin, not a brother, and you are my wife." The emphasis on the word "my" was unmistakable. Evelyn felt a flare of something hot and unfamiliar, anger, perhaps, or the ghost of the hope she thought she had buried. "I am aware of that," she said quietly. "I have been aware of nothing else since the day we wed, but you have made it very clear, Your Grace, that my time is my own, so I have filled it with something worthwhile. I did not realize you wished to supervise it." The air between them crackled. Alexander took a step toward her, and for one breathless moment she thought he might reach for her, but he stopped, his fists clenched at his sides. "You misunderstand," he said, his voice low. "I do not, I merely caution you against appearances. The world is unkind to women whose reputations are questioned." "My reputation," Evelyn said, "is as spotless as my conscience. I am helping children. I am harming no one. If you have a concern, speak it plainly." He stared at her, and something flickered in the depths of his dark eyes, frustration, confusion, a pain she could not name. But he did not speak. He simply turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the silent hall. Evelyn stood alone, her heart beating hard. She did not understand him, she had never understood him, and she was growing too tired to try. The first snow fell in late November, dusting the village rooftops and turning the schoolhouse windows into framed paintings of winter. Evelyn stood inside the warm classroom, listening to the children recite their times tables, when the door opened and a figure stepped through that made her heart stop. Lady Clarissa Drayton, the widowed Countess of Halsbury. She was beautiful in the way a winter rose is beautiful, pale, elegant, touched by frost. Her gown was deep crimson, her fur-lined cloak dusted with melting snow, and when she smiled, it was the smile of a woman who knew exactly the effect she had on a room. "Your Grace," she said, her voice like honey poured over glass, "forgive the intrusion. I was told I might find you here." Evelyn had heard the name, of course. Whispers followed Lady Clarissa like a scent. She had once, it was said, been deeply attached to the Duke of Ashford. There had been talk of an engagement years ago before a sudden and mysterious separation. Some said she had died, others said she had fled. The truth, it seemed, was neither. "Lady Clarissa," Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady, "you are welcome. How may I assist you?" "I have returned to the district after many years abroad. I understand my dear Alexander is still in residence at the Hall. I had hoped to call upon him and offer my renewed acquaintance." Her smile sharpened almost imperceptibly. "I thought it proper to inform his wife first. Etiquette, you understand." Evelyn understood perfectly. This was not a courtesy. It was a declaration of intent. "I shall let him know," she said. "I am sure he will be pleased to receive you." Lady Clarissa's gaze swept over the modest schoolroom, the ink-stained children, the Duchess in her plain wool dress, and something like pity flickered in her expression. "How industrious you are! I do admire a woman who keeps busy. The country can be so dreadfully dull." She swept out as elegantly as she had entered, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Evelyn stood very still. The children, sensing her distraction, fidgeted at their desks. Lily tugged at her sleeve. "Lady Evie, are you well?" Evelyn forced a smile. "Quite well, sweetling. Let us continue with our sums." But her mind was elsewhere. A ghost had walked through the door. And the name she had only ever heard in whispers, Clarissa, was no longer a shadow. She was real, she was here, and she wanted Alexander back. Eveline did not tell her husband about the visit. She did not need to. 3 days later, Lady Clarissa arrived at Ashford Hall in a gleaming carriage, and Alexander received her in the drawing room with the doors closed. Eveline watched from the gallery above as the Countess swept inside, her laughter floating up like music. She saw Alexander bow over her hand. She saw him lead her into the room, and she saw, with a clarity that cut like a blade, the way his shoulders lost their stiffness, the way his head inclined toward Clarissa as if drawn by an invisible thread. She had never seen him look at anyone that way, certainly never at her. Something inside Eveline crumbled quietly. A wall she had built with such care, brick by brick, against the pain of his indifference. She turned away from the railing and walked to her chamber, and she did not come down for dinner. That night, as the house settled into darkness, she stood before her mirror and studied her own reflection. She was still young, still reasonably pretty, but she was not Clarissa. She was not the woman he had loved and lost. She was the woman he had married for money, a placeholder for a ghost. Her hand drifted to her stomach, where the flutter had grown stronger in recent weeks. She was almost certain now. A child, his child, and he did not even know. What would he do when he found out? Would he care? Or would it be one more duty, one more obligation, one more chain binding him to a wife he had never wanted? She did not want to find out. Not yet. Not until she understood what was happening inside her own heart. The following weeks were a slow, exquisite torment. Lady Clarissa became a frequent visitor to Ashford Hall. She arrived for tea, for dinner, for walks in the frosted gardens. She was always perfectly mannered, perfectly dressed, perfectly positioned at Alexander's side. The servants whispered. The tenants gossiped. The Duke, they murmured, had found his way back to his first love. Eveline said nothing. She continued her work at the school, spending longer hours there, returning after dark, her face pale with exhaustion. She no longer joined Alexander and Clarissa for meals. She no longer waited up to see if he would knock on her door. She stopped hopping. She stopped expecting. And Alexander, for his part, seemed caught in a current he could not resist. He did not dismiss Clarissa. He did not discourage her attention. But neither did he seem happy. His eyes grew shadowed. His manner, always reserved, became brittle. When Eveline passed him in the corridor, he looked at her with an expression she could not read, something between guilt and longing, frustration and despair. Once she heard them arguing in the library, their voices muffled but sharp. "You cannot simply reappear and expect everything to be as it was," Alexander said, his tone hard. "I made a mistake, Alex. I was young, I was foolish, but I have never stopped loving you." A long pause, then Alexander's voice, so low Eveline had to strain to hear. "You left me. You chose another man because he had a bigger fortune and a higher title. You let everyone believe you were dead rather than face the shame of what you did. And now you ask me to forget. I ask you to forgive. Is that so impossible?" Another pause. Eveline's heart hammered. Then Alexander spoke again, and his words sent ice through her veins. "I do not know what I feel. I do not know anything anymore." She fled before she could hear more. He did not know what he felt. He did not know. That uncertainty was worse than rejection. It was a door left half open, a wound that would not close, a hope that refused to die no matter how hard she tried to smother it. But Eveline was finished with hope. That night she sat at her writing desk and composed 2 letters. The first was to her father, requesting permission to return to the family's small estate in Somerset for an extended visit. The second was to the vicar, Mr. Hollies, with detailed instructions for the school's continued operation in her absence. She did not write to Alexander. She had nothing left to say. The physician confirmed it on a gray December morning. Eveline sat in the cold examination room, her hands folded over her stomach, while the elderly doctor smiled and offered his congratulations. She was with child, nearly 4 months along. The baby would arrive in early summer. She thanked him quietly, paid his fee, and walked out into the falling snow. A child, a living, breathing consequence of a single night months ago when Alexander had come to her chamber after a dinner with political allies. He had been distant but not unkind, and she had hoped, foolishly, that it meant something. The next morning he had been gone before she woke, and they had never spoken of it. Now this. She walked through the village, past the schoolhouse where the children's voices rose in a Christmas carol, past the cottages where smoke curled from chimneys, past the church where she had sat alone Sunday after Sunday while her husband worshipped at the opposite end of the pew. She would not raise this child in a house where it was not wanted. She would not let it grow up watching its father's eyes slide past its mother as if she were furniture. She would give it love, all the love she had, but she would not give it Ashford Hall. The decision crystallized like ice forming on a winter pond. She would leave. She would go to Somerset to her father's modest manor, and she would have this child in peace. Alexander could have his Clarissa. He could have his ghosts and his regrets and his cold, empty halls. She was done. She returned to Ashford Hall and began to pack. The Duke noticed the trunks first. He was descending the staircase when he saw 2 footmen carrying a large traveling case toward the entrance hall. Another trunk already stood by the door, and a maid was hurrying down the corridor with an armful of folded gowns. Something cold gripped his chest. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. The footmen froze. One of them stammered, "Her Grace's luggage, Your Grace. She is preparing for a journey." A journey? Alexander's mind raced. She had not mentioned any journey. She had barely spoken to him in weeks. She had become a shadow in his own house, slipping past him in corridors, avoiding his gaze, her laughter, which he now realized he had not heard in what felt like an eternity, silenced entirely. He strode toward her chamber without thinking, his heart pounding in a way that felt foreign and frightening. He did not knock. He pushed open the door. Eveline stood before her wardrobe, a folded shawl in her hands. She turned at his entrance, and her expression was not surprised. It was resigned, as if she had been expecting this confrontation and had already made her peace with it. "You are leaving," he said. It came out harsher than he intended, an accusation rather than a question. "Yes." "Without informing me." "I did not think you would notice." The words landed like a blow. He flinched, actually flinched, and something hot and painful surged through him. "Eveline." "I am going to my father's house in Somerset," she said, her voice perfectly calm. "I will stay there until the child is born. After that I do not know. Perhaps I will return. Perhaps I will not. I have not decided." The room tilted. Alexander gripped the doorframe. "Child? What child?" Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps that he did not know. "Our child. I am with child 4 months now." A child. His child. Growing inside her while he had been blind and distant and wrapped up in his own turmoil. He had not known. He had not even suspected. He had been so consumed by Clarissa's return, by the resurfacing of old wounds, that he had failed to see the woman standing right in front of him. The woman carrying his child. The woman he had driven away. "You cannot leave," he said, his voice breaking on the last word. "Not like this, not now." Eveline looked at him, and there was no anger in her gaze, only a profound, devastating sadness. "Why not, Alexander? Give me one reason. One genuine reason that has nothing to do with duty or obligation or the opinion of society." He opened his mouth, closed it. His mind was a chaos of tangled emotions, old fears and new regrets, and he could not find the words. He had spent years building walls around his heart, and now, when he desperately needed to tear them down, he did not know how. He began. The silence stretched. Eveline's expression did not change, but something in her shoulders dropped, as if a last, tiny hope had just flickered out. "I see," she said softly, "then I will go." She turned back to her packing. Her hands were steady. She folded the shawl and placed it in the trunk. And she did not look at him again. Alexander stood in the doorway, frozen, while the world rearranged itself around him. He was losing her. She was leaving, taking his child with her, and he had done nothing to stop it. He had given her no reason to stay. And he was terrified. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his study, the fire burning low, a glass of brandy untouched at his elbow. The portrait on the wall, the one he had never allowed anyone to remove, stared down at him. Clarissa, painted in her youth, all golden hair and laughing eyes before she had broken his heart and disappeared. He had kept it there as a reminder, a warning: do not trust, do not love, it only leads to pain. But the warning had become a cage. And inside that cage, he had trapped not only himself but an innocent woman who had done nothing but try to love him. He thought of Eveline on their wedding day. She had been so hopeful, her eyes bright, her smile trembling. She had looked at him as if he were a miracle, and he had looked through her as if she were a stranger. He thought of the countless nights she had waited for him in the parlor, a book open on her lap, her head lifting eagerly at every footstep. He thought of the way she had slowly stopped waiting, the light dimming in her eyes, the smile fading. He thought of Lord William Harrington, looking at Eveline as if she were the sun itself, and the hot, jagged jealousy that had torn through him at the sight. He thought of Clarissa's return, and the confusing whirl of anger and indifference he had felt, and the slow realization that he did not want her. He had not wanted her for years. What he wanted. Eveline. He wanted Eveline. He wanted her smile, her quiet strength, her gentle hands. He wanted the sound of her laughter, the way she tucked stray hairs behind her ear, the passion she poured into her school and her children. He wanted to be the one who made her happy. He wanted to be worthy of her. But he had realized it too late. Or perhaps not, perhaps there was still time. He rose abruptly, knocking the brandy glass to the floor. It shattered, but he did not care. He strode out of the study and up the stairs, his heart hammering, his mind made up. He would not let her go, not without a fight. Her chamber door was ajar, a faint light spilling through the crack. He pushed it open without hesitation. Eveline was sitting on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed, a single candle burning on the nightstand. She looked up as he entered, and her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. "Alexander, what is it?" He crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees before her. The gesture was so unexpected, so utterly unlike his usual rigid composure, that she gasped and drew back. "Don't go," he said, his voice raw and cracked. "Please don't leave." She stared at him, her lips parted, her expression a war of confusion and disbelief. "What are you doing?" "I am begging," he said. "I am begging my wife not to leave me. I am begging the mother of my child to give me one more chance." Tears spilled over her lashes, tracking silently down her cheeks. "You have never wanted me, Alexander, not once. You married me for convenience. You tolerated me. You ignored me. And now you kneel and expect me to believe." "I was a fool," he cut in, his voice breaking. "I was a coward. I built walls around my heart because I was afraid of being hurt again, and I did not realize that the walls were not protecting me. They were destroying everything I might have had, everything we might have had." He reached for her hands, and she let him take them, her fingers cold and trembling. "Clarissa," he said, the name bitter on his tongue, "was never my great love. She was my great humiliation. She left me, Eveline. She chose a richer man, a higher title, and when she realized her mistake too late, she let the world believe she had died rather than admit what she had done. I let them believe it too. I was too proud to tell the truth. I kept her portrait as a reminder of my own folly, not as a shrine to lost love. And when she returned, I felt nothing. Nothing but anger and weariness, and a desperate wish that she would leave." Eveline's breath caught. "But I heard you, in the library. You said you did not know what you felt." I was confused, he admitted. I was trying to untangle years of buried pain, but I knew even then. I knew I did not love her. I knew I had not loved her for a very long time. What I did not know, what I was too blind to see, was that my heart had already chosen someone else. He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them, his eyes burning with an intensity she had never seen before. It chose you, Eveline. Somewhere along the way, without my permission, without my awareness, I fell in love with you, with your kindness, your strength, your quiet, stubborn grace, and I was too afraid to admit it, too stubborn to show it, until now. Until I am on my knees, watching you prepare to walk out of my life and knowing that if you go, I will have nothing. I will be nothing. She was sobbing now, silent tears streaming down her face. You hurt me, Alexander. You hurt me so much. I know. His voice was barely a whisper. I know, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends if you will let me. But please, please do not leave. Please give me the chance to love you the way you deserve to be loved. Please let me be a father to our child. Please. The word hung in the air between them. Please. The Duke of Ashford, who never begged, who never knelt, who never showed vulnerability to anyone, was on his knees before his wife, his eyes wet, his heart laid bare. Eveline looked at him for a long, trembling moment. Then she reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw, the dampness on his cheek. You will have to earn it, she said, her voice unsteady. My trust, my heart, it will not come easily. I will earn it, he promised fiercely, every day for the rest of my life. She closed her eyes. A shudder ran through her, and then she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. Then I will stay, she whispered, for the child, for the hope that you mean what you say, for the love I have never been able to stop feeling no matter how hard I tried. He pulled her into his arms then, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, and she let herself be held. The candle flickered. The snow fell silently outside the window, and somewhere deep in the house, the portrait of Lady Clarissa Drayton was taken down from the study wall and consigned to the attic, where it would gather dust for the rest of its days. Spring came to Ashford Hall with a tenderness that felt like a promise. The schoolhouse flourished, and Eveline continued her work there, though now she was often accompanied by the Duke himself. He learned the children's names. He helped repair a leaking roof. He sat in the back of the classroom and listened to his wife read aloud, and the villagers who had once pitied her now whispered of a transformation that bordered on miraculous. He brought her flowers for no reason. He held her hand at dinner. He told her she was beautiful every morning, and every night he kissed her forehead before she fell asleep. He was awkward at first, unsure, as if learning a language he had never been taught. But he learned. He learned the shape of her smiles, the meaning of her silences, the way she liked her tea, the books that made her eyes light up. When their son was born on a golden morning in early June, Alexander wept. He held the tiny, squalling bundle in his arms and looked at his wife with an awe that bordered on reverence. You have given me everything, he said, his voice choked, and I did nothing to deserve it. Eveline, exhausted and radiant, reached up and touched his cheek. You gave me yourself, at last. That was all I ever wanted. He leaned down and kissed her, softly, reverently, and in that kiss was a vow. Not the cold, contractual vow of their wedding day, but a real one, a living one, a promise to love, to protect, to cherish for all the days of their lives. Outside the window, the roses were in full bloom, their fragrance drifting through the open casement. The sound of children's laughter carried from the village, where the school bell was ringing. And inside the great house of Ashford, a duchess who had once stood utterly alone now lay in the arms of a duke who would never let her feel invisible again. He had loved her too late to prevent the pain, but not too late to heal it. And that, they both understood, was a gift beyond measure. The years that followed were not without their trials. Old habits die hard, and there were days when Alexander's reserve crept back, when the shadows of his past made him distant and Eveline had to reach for him with patient hands. But he always came back. He always reached for her in return. They learned to speak the language of each other's hearts, slowly, imperfectly, with grace. The school grew into one of the finest in the county. Lord William Harrington, who had never been anything but a friend, married a lovely scholar from Oxford and remained a frequent and welcome guest. Lady Clarissa Drayton, after a brief attempt to stir further scandal, retreated to Bath and was rarely spoken of again. And in the quiet moments, walking through the rose garden, sitting before the fire with their son playing at their feet, stealing kisses in empty corridors, Alexander and Eveline discovered that love, real love, was not a single grand declaration. It was 1,000 small choices, made daily to be present, to be kind, to be brave enough to let another person in. She had stopped waiting, and in doing so, she had found everything she never dared to hope for. He had nearly lost her, and in the terror of that loss, he had found himself. Together, they built a life not on duty or obligation, but on the quiet, stubborn, unshakable foundation of two hearts that had learned at last to beat as one.